Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am going to hold on for a few seconds while our platform lets everyone in. In the meantime, you are welcome to use the chat box, drop in your name, let us know where you're bringing in from today, and in just a minute, we'll get started. Oh, wonderful to see people from so many places. Oh, this is great. Oh, fantastic. All over the country. Terrific. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know people will continue to join us, and that's just terrific. Keep putting in your names and places. It's lovely to see where everyone is from. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, Supporting LGBTQ Youth in Our Communities. My name is Schroeder Stribling, and I'm the president and CEO at Mental Health America, and I am very proud for Pride Month and happy to be moderating our webinar today. A few notes before I introduce our presenters. The webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to everyone who registered within 1 week. We do not offer CEUs, but if you would like a certificate of attendance, we have a form for you to request one. A link to that will be posted in the chat just shortly and will be included in the follow-up email as well for you. We have terrific panelists and we've got some questions ready for them. And in addition, at the end, if we have time, excuse me, we'll do some Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and our webinar terrific monitor and guide, Jackie Zimmerman here from MHA, who will be watching that and can look at some questions for us if we have the time. So I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today, Paul Jaquith, Casey Pick, Sin Gomez, and Kema Bolokai. And I would like to start by giving you a bit of background on each of these extraordinary guests. Casey Pick is the Senior Fellow for Advocacy and Government Affairs for the Trevor Project. She works to advance state and federal policies that support LGBTQ youth in crisis, educating policymakers and the public about LGBTQ youth and mental health issues. And she also writes and coordinates amicus briefs, collaborates with state and local advocates, and testifies to support legislation protecting LGBTQ youth. Sin Gomez is a 19-year-old first-generation second-year student at UC Berkeley, studying social welfare with minors in race and the law, and also in Spanish. They are an election poll worker, a Berkeley Student Cooperative House president, a student worker at UC Berkeley, a member of the Associated Students of the University of California, and chief advisor to that group on queer and trans wellness, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion director for Tangible Movement. Kema Bolokai is a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland, a national certified counselor and EMDR trained therapist with Onyx Therapy Group. Kema has 13 years of experience working with children and adolescents who have experienced trauma, and 6 years of experience working with women and children fleeing domestic violence. As a member of the LGBTQ community, she empowers youth to shine in their light. Paul Jaquith is a licensed clinical social worker and certified addictions professional with over 40 years of experience in social work. He's an expert clinical professional who has provided services to adults and children dealing with the challenges of mental illness and substance abuse. He was appointed as president and CEO of Mental Health America of Southeast Florida in 2012. We are so grateful to have you all with us. Thank you, each of you, for joining us. And before we started, I wanted to just wish you each a personal happy Pride Month from me. I identify as a second generation queer person myself, and in my now many decades of it have celebrated Pride Month many times, and I'm just so delighted to be here and have the opportunity to talk with you all about the meaning of Pride Month and Pride for youth and how we support our LGBTQ youth today. So without further ado, I thought I would ask each of you, tell us a little bit about your Pride Month story, whatever that means to you. And anyone is welcome to jump in.
I can go ahead and go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Sin, and I am a first generation queer person, both identifying as bisexual and transgender. So it's been an interesting journey over the last couple of years, to be sure. For me, the first time I would have been able to celebrate Pride would have been 2020. That was the first time I was out to everyone in my family, everyone around me. We can kind of put two and two together that I wasn't able to celebrate Pride. But the following year, I actually got to celebrate in LA, San Francisco, and DC all throughout the month of June. So I think that made up for 2020. So for me, I think my Pride story comes from the fact that I've been able to find small ways of expressing myself, whether it be throughout high school and finding those pockets of community and celebrating there, or advocating for my school to have a pride flag displayed throughout the month of June in high school, or just radical queer joy of relaxing and having fun and just existing, which is something that I've learned over the last couple of months. So what I really look forward to this time around, once again, I'll have the opportunity to celebrate in LA, San Francisco, and DC. So very excited to be doing that for the second year. Might become a tradition, but looking forward to hear also what everyone else's story looks like.
I love that, Sin. Thank you for that story. And I am impressed that you managed to celebrate Pride in 3 cities and you're going to do it again. That's dedication. And I also love the phrase radical queer joy. I'm going to hold on to that one. Anybody else?
So I just did the math and realized that I've been out, at least to myself, for 20 years now, which means 20 years of prides, 20 years of seeing what that looks like. And it always means something different every year. I remember being very young and pride being something that I knew that was happening out there, somewhere else, other people, but it was kind of like this beacon, lights in a dark place of, maybe someday. Other years along the way, I've gotten involved in political advocacy and work on behalf of the community. So sometimes Pride has been my opportunity to recruit volunteers and tell people the stories and the issues that are affecting our communities. So Pride has often been an opportunity that way. It's been a great chance to celebrate, a great opportunity for new allies to speak up in a way that, is a little bit easier maybe to, when there's a day on the calendar that gives you the opportunity to say, what am I going to do today? And so I love having Pride as an opportunity for new allies to step up in new ways. And then sometimes it can just be very personal. I remember that Pride one year, it was after one of my parents had passed away, and I'd had a really hard year. I actually hadn't been able to go to church in a long time just because that hadn't felt like a place where I could, find comfort. And then I went to Pride and was actually able to take communion at a booth in Pride because that felt like all of me was there and being invited to it. So Pride can mean a lot of things, and I'm really excited to see what it means this year.
That's great. I love that, Casey. I love the notion of this time as a moment for leveraging new allies. Great.
All right, I'll go next. I saw a lot of people in the chat saying they're from Montgomery County, Maryland. Woo, woo, woo. Let's bring in the love. for me, Pride Month is expressing who I am. I do it 365 days a year. Someone said, I love your lipstick, Kama. This is me. I'm going to show it off. I'm going to be myself, be my authentic self. And just enjoying that every day. What can I say? I'm a little older. Maybe not as old as Paul, but
Uh-oh,
I will say that loving me for the last 40 something years has been a joy. And just again, expressing who I am, what I love. I have 3 daughters, and I embrace them with all of their love, and their uniqueness and their creativity. And the community that I serve is the same way. It's all about love, empowering, and just being being their authentic self. So that's celebrating Pride for me.
I love that too, bringing your whole self forward 365 days a year, and especially during Pride Month. I like it.
All right, Kama, you threw down, so now I'm throwing back. So I'm a little uncomfortable because I'm like, for the first time, the minority, and which is fine. As a white straight male, I don't even know how I got into this group, but I think I do. I am situated here in Florida, and for anyone who's following the news and what's going on in terms of the pushback, Florida has become, and I think Texas too, for that matter, have become kind of central areas in terms of pushing back some kind of agenda politically. I had written an op-ed piece in our newspaper when the quote, "Don't Say Gay" bill was being introduced in the state legislature and here in Florida, which unfortunately passed. And my experience with it is obviously I was against it for a lot of reasons. And I'm glad Casey's on this because we recently had another organization merge with us called Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention. And so we recognize the intersect of people with LGBTQ questions, children particularly. The point of my article was, you know, we're now going to make it impossible for a child to approach someone in school that they may trust. And so, you know, we've already got kids who are feeling alienated to begin with and can't go to their parents with how they're feeling or to describe some of their, you know, questioning that they have, and they would like to go to someone at the school. Well, now the school's hands been tied essentially because they're going to be mandated to report to someone. We don't know how that's going to work. That child X has now said, I'm having these feelings. And so now it has to be reported to parents who may not be really equipped to deal with how do you have the conversation. And you know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but how do you know, especially if you've grown up in a family, I don't care what age you are, you feel it from the very early on. I always say that families are better at keeping secrets than the CIA. And it's done through a process of open secrecy, I like to call it, you know, that you understand what you're allowed to speak about, and more importantly, what you're not allowed to speak about when you're in a family, when you're in a family system. So I'm hoping we can do some exploration of that today. I'm happy to be part of this group. I really, we do a lot of work in LGBTQ. We have board members that represent LGBTQ. We believe in inclusion, as does MHA in its mission. That's our home. That's where we live. So we want to be able to have an open conversation, a truthful conversation about how people feel and what the struggles are, you know, and reduce even more trauma to people.
Yeah, Well, Paul, we know exactly how you got in this group because you're a terrific advocate and ally for the LGBTQ community. And we thank you for your efforts there in Florida, which are especially important right now. And I think you're taking us, that's a nice segue into some of our questions to talk about youth and what are the best things we can do to be supporting LGBTQ youth right now. So maybe we'll start off a little bit about, let's take this notion of Pride Month, a time to be our whole selves, a time to activate new allies for the movement, et cetera, and think and also the context that Paul is bringing to us about what's happening in the larger culture and country, and what are the best ways that we can be supportive of LGBTQ youth right now? What are the effective systems that are in place, or maybe ones that aren't in place that we'd like to be to support youth? And how can we use Pride Month to leverage this opportunity?
That is a great series of questions that I'm going to try and hit just the edge of, and I look forward to hearing what my co-panelists have to say as well. For those who may not be aware, my organization, the Trevor Project, is the world's largest provider of suicide prevention and mental health support organization for LGBTQ youth and young people. So for more than 20 years, we've been advocating and directly supporting the mental health of LGBTQ young people. And part of what we do to do that is actually an extensive amount of research. So for the last several years, we have surveyed every year more than 30,000 LGBTQ young people between the ages of 24 and 13, asking questions on a wide range of issues that are affecting their mental health. And some of those questions include, where do you find support? What can adults, parents, and caregivers do to support you and to benefit your mental health? And we see where youth have different experiences and how those correlate to higher or lower rates of mental health challenges and suicide attempts. So just to speak specifically to some of the good things that we can do, some of the things that are what we call protective factors and beneficial to youth mental health. One of them, I'll say, is having an affirming home, schools, and community. Paul was talking a bit about what's going on in schools. We know that, unfortunately, only about 37% of LGBTQ youth in this year's survey found that their home is an LGBTQ affirming space. Contrast that to 55% who told us that their school was affirming. So you see a bit of a disconnect there. So schools are a really important place for youth to find connection, support, trusted adults, and being able to protect that as an option is really important. Family support. So of those 37% that said they had a supportive family, what does that even look like in a really concrete way? So we actually asked, what are the supportive actions that adults and caregivers can take? And the number one thing that we actually heard back was being welcoming to their LGBTQ friends and family, friends and partners. So embracing not just your own child, but their support network and their friends who also share their identity. Talking with the young person respectfully about their LGBTQ identity. For trans and non-binary youth, using the correct names and pronouns and doing so consistently. It really does matter. Supporting gender expression, and this applies honestly not just to trans and non-binary youth, and not even really to LGBTQ youth, but all youth, is allowing youth to be who they are and express themselves as they like to, and recognizing that that changes over time. And the last one I'll call out is really doing the work to educate yourself about LGBTQ people, issues, and the challenges that are confronting our community today. So for all of you who are here today doing exactly that, I say thank you.
That's great information, Casey, from the study, and very concrete information about where youth are finding and not finding support. And it does put even more emphasis on the point that Paul was discussing about protecting school space as a safe space. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go ahead and add. Yeah, know very intimately what this looks like. I am the demographic that Casey's work highlights, and I have used the Trevor Project in like very, very hard times of need, and I know I'm not alone when I say that. And that's terrifying that this is such a common thread, that we need consistent hotlines, that we need consistent warm lines, that we need variations of options. And it kind of illustrates just what the landscape is looking like for young people. Obviously, Paul knows very intimately what that looks like for young people in Florida. I have friends in Florida. I have friends that have also tapped into these resources. And it's very interesting to know what it's like to be in that position and also be on the other side of it, past crisis, past dire need. And I think that for me, a couple of things that I really want to highlight, it has kind of been what I've found since being at that point, since needing to tap into those resources, and finding more consistent care. For me, the primary one that came to mind when we were thinking of this question were support circles, and kind of peer-to-peer support. I know MHA does a lot of this work already, and I think that embedding it in every space, in your extended family, finding your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, similar ages, that they understand you and they know what it's like to be in this very specific time period of history, I would say. And, I think that this is something that not only would support young people, but also their family members, parents who have recently had their child come out, siblings who are trying to navigate that support with them, or be that support if parents aren't willing to do that work. And I think this allows for you to kind of be in community, but also without the pressure to perform. I know that for me, even being in this space right now, this is very much a way in which I'm performing, understanding that I'm representing all of the young people that are struggling right now. So knowing that this is kind of the reality that we're in, and finding spaces where your guide can come down and you don't feel that pressure to perform, is extremely helpful for young people. Not only that, but having culturally competent therapists and healthcare teams is enormous. I go to UC Berkeley. There's a trans healthcare team that I've been very fortunate to be in touch with. But not only that, having a healthcare team that knows intimately what your experience is like, having gone through it themselves, or being medically trained to understand how to support you, is extremely important. And not to mention, if you're able to meet the access for at least myself, where you're able to have a bi-POC and a queer therapist or healthcare team, there's just so much that is changed from this. They're able to understand what intimately are your triggers, what kind of care looks like for you, and they're able to just respond. And I think you don't need to explain yourself in a way that a lot of queer folks or a lot of people of color feel the need to. And my last one would be explicitly safe spaces for queer folks are really important. I'm fortunate enough to be in San Francisco very often. So, and even in Berkeley, there are very explicit spaces that are, this space is for like BIPOC people. This space is safe for queer people. And a lot of times, knowing that if you're walking into this space, as soon as, or even before you come into it, that they hire, they care for, and they'll protect queer folks that are in this space, it breaks down so many of the barriers that might be in place, especially when it comes to the anxiety that just comes from navigating everyday life as a queer person or a person of color. So I think that that's very important, to kind of walk into a space and be able to put your guard down, understanding that a lot of young people also don't have those spaces naturally, whether it would have been your campus or your home. Another place where community is usually found is in nightlife. And I think that that's largely inaccessible. So having cafes, having libraries, having these spaces that are way more community oriented, be explicitly safe for the younger folks, has been really helpful for me. And I know is wildly underdeveloped. So I look forward to seeing what that looks like going forward too.
Great responses. I love that. Peer-to-peer support, affirming care and resources that you need, like Trevor Project or like clinicians who are affirming, culturally responsive, et cetera, and safe spaces. Great contributions.
I think we have to, we've come a long way, if you will, as an industry, the mental health and substance abuse, behavioral health industry. You realize that you would have, if you were gay or lesbian, you would have been considered mentally ill up until about, I think, 1992 or 1982, something like that. And the DSM, those proclivities, as they were called, were considered to be a mental illness. So welcome to the world of mental health, everybody, because you're now normal. We've come a long way from those days, that even in our own industry, there was and has been and continues to be pushback. And I'm proud of, like, at least on a local level, some of our communities have outlawed the what do you call it, the therapy where you can
Conversion
therapy, right? So that's been outlawed in a lot of local cities here as just ridiculous, and it has no basis in anything that's even remotely evidence-based. But yet, because it had this feeling of there's a religious undertone to it always, right? So we I think need to reach out to the faith-based community. I think we have an obligation to bring them along there, but that's not to say that it's happened across the board, because there are, I can tell you, even locally here in Broward County, there are churches and faith-based organizations that are very accepting, very accommodating. And to your point, Sin, you need a place where you feel like I could just be myself. I don't have to be a title or a different person than who I feel like I am inside. And that creates the turmoil, right? Is when you have to kind of have this outside facade, but internally it's boiling away, and it's creating trauma, so we know that trauma, it breaks you down over the course of time, and Casey's data is spot on in terms of the number of people that are, these are the people that are identifying as LGBTQ. There's more people that won't even say it, even on an anonymous survey. So we know the numbers are higher than that. And one of the other things that's happening, I hate to kind of harp on Florida since I live here, but the state has now decided we're not going to participate in the national surveys for students. Like, I don't understand it, because now we're going to operate completely in the dark if it doesn't get pushed back. And there is pushback, and we are pushing against it, saying we need data. We need to know what's going on. We need to understand what's happening in our schools. It's incredible. So, as much as this is about being positive and about pride, and it is, we're under siege and under attack also. And I think we've still got work to do. As much as we've accomplished, there's still work to do. And I think that we've got to keep our eye on it and watch and be open to discussing it. As a white male, straight white male in this group, I feel my obligation to speak up and to say, this isn't right. This is just wrong on so many levels. I can't even begin to express how upset I am by the push I'm seeing going in this other direction. So we've got work to do, and I appreciate, we've got great advocates. I mean, Schroeder, when I met Schroeder and she told me her story, it blew me away. She has an incredible story to tell, and maybe we can get her to tell it sometime, maybe even today, but it's an incredible story of how her life kind of turned towards being an advocate. And everyone's got great stories. I mean, they really, but they talk about the personal struggles and the internal struggle. I'm going on. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No, that's okay. And thank you, Paul. That was, and thanks for your kind comments. And I think that, that's important real talk about what the challenges of the day are. And also you're pointing out, I think, what challenges we've had historically that we still carry with us in some of these systems of care. I mean, it's absolutely true. Mental health has not always been a place where the LGBTQ community was accepted, and for a long time was, you know, as you mentioned, it was in the DSM as a disorder. Um, to be gay or lesbian. And I will just tell one very quick story, which is that when I came out formally to my mother and stepfather, very loving mother and stepfather that I'm fortunate to have, in 1986, about my darling stepfather, the first thing he said was, when we sat down to have the conversation, he said, well, I had written him a letter, and I got home and we went to have a conversation about it. And he said, well, I went to the library and I looked it up, and, you know, it was taken out of the diagnostic manual, so I don't see a problem. A lovely, very concrete approach to the situation. And they've been wonderful supports all my life.
Yeah, actually, if anyone wants to know about the story of how homosexuality was taken out of the DSM in 1973, there's a great movie for Pride. It's called Cured. It came out just a couple of years ago, and it really tells the story of the LGBTQ people who back then were sick and tired of being called sick, and the kinds of advocacy and activism, from marching in the streets to working in the halls of power at the APA, is truly inspiring. The film actually broadcast on PBS earlier this year. I believe it will be coming back again. But yeah, check that one out if you're looking for an inspirational story of LGBTQ people who've come before and been able to successfully make change. And this is still a conversation that is relevant. Thank you, Paul, for raising up the specter of conversion therapy. That is something that I am still working every day to ban in this country today. We've got 20 states that have passed legal bans. Another handful of governors have passed executive orders, but there's still work to be done. So yeah, that's my Pride season recommendation of, if you're looking for an inspirational film and some often unknown LGBTQ history, check out Cured.
Yes, great recommendation.
Hey, Schroeder, I see, like, I'm looking at the chats and seeing questions come up, and someone asked about how do we access information. And most communities have a 211 system, so they really should take advantage of 211. If there's a kid that's questioning and saying, how do I get information about this? They can call 211, and they should have all kinds of information. So I wanted to just respond to that real quick.
Great.
And I just wanted to add something just to kind of piggyback off of everyone in regards to like resources and things like that. The schools, like just having a lot of training, you know, when we talk about culturally and competent therapists or providers, definitely being able to have forums like this on a weekly or a monthly basis, because everything is updating, things are changing, and being able to just be informed. And then, you know, working with the youth that I work with, yes, definitely, Sid, when you said, you know, making sure that our pronouns are right and things like that, you know, that is very important to make sure that we are addressing an individual. You know, I get that pushback a lot. Well, I don't care, you know, this is her or this is his government name on paper. No, we need to respect what someone is asking us to do. So that's the piece of, you know, where I come in is like, no, we need to empower, you know, our youth to say, no, this is who I am. This is me, my authentic. You're gonna hear me say this throughout the authentic self, right? This is who I am. And so respecting me on that level is definitely important. And I'm like a very firm believer in that. So I just wanted to add that little 2 cents in there, because you guys said most of everything, but definitely the trainings and, you know, providers being competent to just being updated with, you know, new information that's coming out, new laws that are coming out, new terminology, and just being aware of that and, you know, respecting the authentic self of the person.
Yeah, I love that, Kema. And it also introduces, we've touched on it a little bit, but maybe we could dive in a bit more to talking about the intersection of LGBTQ identity and culture, and what's important for youth, what's important for all of us, but in particular, since we're talking about youth, what's important in making sure that we're protecting them, or important for us to understand about how that plays out for them.
I can go based off of something I saw in the chat. Just kind of language barriers for me. A lot of my extended family is native Spanish speakers. A lot of my community is native Spanish speakers. And someone brought up how that can be a barrier to access of care, or even just understanding or meeting folks where they are. So if there's already that initial thing that's limiting who has access to this knowledge, who has access to the support, who has access to crisis resources, these are all very important things that need to be addressed, because not only is it Spanish limitations, it's Cantonese, it's Tagalog, it's all of these things that we're looking at mental health through a very colonial lens. We're looking at it through a white supremacist, a very nativist perspective that doesn't acknowledge that not everyone speaks English. Not everyone's family is going to understand what it means to be queer. People are going to have their cultural context, that we need to meet people where they are instead of telling them this is how it is, and meeting folks and making it make sense for where they're coming from. And I think that that's really important first and foremost, but to understand also what internalized homophobia, transphobia, all these very real things look like when you're also looking at, for me, a Catholic perspective. The Catholic Church is one of like the strongest infrastructures against queer people, have a lot of money, have a lot of support. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that also needs to be understood, is how we can meet people where they are with their context within the church and frame it as God doesn't make mistakes. And for people to be making this assumption that this is a mistake, that you are going against God, it very much so frames it as an individual thing as opposed to a collective, and trusting that this is a choice by your creator to ensure that you are a part of something, that you are mobilized and cared for by a community like everyone here, is really important. So I think that that's kind of like, for me, what the context looks like. But I know, Kamal, you were also going to speak, so go ahead.
You know, it's interesting. I like to do this as like a little test. And so if I go up to someone and say, where are you from? And I did it with Kama too, before we started. And she had to stop for a minute because she thought, do you mean what country or what state? Or do you mean like, and I said, no, I like, where are you from in terms of your professional background, right? If someone asks me that question, I'm going to say, oh, I'm from Pembroke Pines, which is a city I live in, right? And people just like, okay, because I'm a white male who's in the majority. And so just think of our own prejudices, our own judgments we make about people when we see them, right? When we see the color of their skin, maybe they don't look the same, or maybe they have an accent. So even like a simple question, what you would think is a simple question, where are you from, can take on different meanings to people. I mean, talk about being acculturated to, white males have a place, if you will, in the United States, but not everyone that feels that way, right? So it's interesting. I just think it's, to Sin's point about, people make certain assumptions based on what you look like or what you sound like or how you dress or whatever. And so different questions take on different meanings. And to Kama's point about being as clinical people, are we aware of what we're asking of people and what it means to someone when we even just say what we think is a simple, straightforward question, but it takes on a different meaning depending on what your experience is. So, absolutely. I mean, it's something we all have to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely wanted to call out from the mental health perspective, from the access to healthcare perspective. We know that LGBTQ people experience serious disparities in healthcare for a lot of reasons, but one very simple one is not trusting doctors in the first place, not feeling like they're going to be heard or understood. And some of that comes down to the first contact you have with a doctor's office, where there's an intake form and you're being asked to check a box. Are you male or female? A lot harder question for our trans and non-binary friends. And also for people of different sexual orientations. That becomes an immediately challenging space with these artifacts from outdated medical systems and medical terminology. I'm a professional advocate. I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've got skin like an elephant. But I'll tell you that when I tried a new doctor about a year or so back, and in the course of our conversation, identified myself as a lesbian, and then I look at the notes afterwards and see that that somehow got translated into, completely inappropriately, quote, high risk homosexual behavior, I almost never went back to that doctor. And that would have been very dangerous for my own health. It made it harder to establish trust with that doctor. So that's like one form of cultural competency to think about, is just in terms of how are you allowing people to identify themselves and how are you hearing them? Another thing that I want to throw out there is, yeah, high risk conversation with that doc. She was well intended. She didn't mean to. I talked to her about it later. She said, oh, it's just the old software. Doesn't matter. That's one of those things you need to prioritize fixing. But yeah, other things you can get data on and understanding of. When Trevor does those massive surveys, that lets us look at intersections of communities that don't often get a lot of data or a lot of sunlight. So we were able to now put out research briefs about the experiences of LGBTQ people who are Asian American Pacific Islander, who are deaf, who are autistic, who are Indigenous and Native American. And each of those different reports shines different bits of light that lets us raise up the policy needs and community needs. So I'm going to drop in our research page. That's a great rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, just this culturally competent angle means so much. And one last part of it, that's why Trevor Project exists. We've actually done the research, and something like 80% of LGBTQ youth tell us they're much more comfortable talking to a lifeline that is meant for LGBTQ people for lots of reasons. I've heard horror stories from trans people who would call a different lifeline and be misgendered in the midst of crisis because somebody made an assumption based on their voice. So, and that just takes, a crisis that may have entirely different causes and compounds it rather than providing help. So that's why it's really important that we raise up these various different aspects of who we are and recognize all of them as we provide care.
Yeah, and that's why I stress, the trainings and being updated with the information that's needed to assist the community. I mean, I'm sorry that, just hearing that, Casey, I'm just there's just no way. If I'm telling you who I am, this is who I am, you need to believe it. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And, again, the provider meeting the patient or the client where they are, being able to learn about them, being informed, gathering information, taking the time, starting with the conversation. How are you? What's going on? Those questions. I don't care if it's a mental health professional or if it's a medical doctor, getting to know who you're going to be working with and providing services for is super important. And, being able to have that respect, dignity, trust, the safe space, right? To be your authentic self is really important. So, yeah, we got to get on this. I'm just these are horror stories that I'm hearing, and I'm in, again, Montgomery County, Maryland. We try to do what we can here in the Maryland, DC, DMV area to provide awareness. There's but to hear this in other parts of the country, wow, it's just very shocking and very hurtful.
Yeah. So I loved that collection of responses around the intersection with culture. And I love the theme that I heard in what all of you were saying, which is about assumptions and implicit bias and awareness and curiosity about the understanding how we can educate ourselves and be sensitive to the cultural context in which somebody is coming out or identifying as an LGBTQ person may mean a very different thing in different cultural contexts. And Casey, thank you for sharing those specific briefs that Trevor is doing. I think seems like a great advancement. So in a number of your responses, you've touched on issues for trans and gender diverse youth, and maybe we could go there for a second, especially because just to anchor us back in Paul's comments about the sociocultural context that we're in right now, and what's happening with a number of these anti-trans bills that have been introduced, et cetera, and what that might mean or feel like for a youth living in one of the states where that's the case, or other specific issues for trans youth. Could you all talk a little bit about what are the key issues that community of youth is facing, and given our current climate, what can we do as allies and advocates to work on their behalf?
Sounds like you're calling my name. So I'll throw out just a quick little overview of what we're seeing across the country on these anti-trans bills. They really kind of fall into four real buckets. Kind of the most high profile and most media coverage went to bills that would ban transgender young people from participating in sports. We've seen these passing. I think we've got 13 of them across the country now. We have another bucket of bills, kind of older but coming back for an encore. Are these bathroom bills? Bills that would police what restroom people use based on their sex assigned at birth or what's on their birth certificate, as though anybody carries that with them, or it makes a difference when you need to find a restroom. The third category of bill that we've seen a lot of that are really frightening are these bills that would prohibit providing transition-related health care, helping a young person to transition, whether that be just simple therapy, puberty blockers, access to hormones, or other forms of treatment to support somebody's gender transition. We've seen these bills introduced across the country. They've only passed, thankfully, in a few states, Arkansas and Alabama thus far, and have been challenged in court. And then there's the type of bill that Paul was talking about, the so-called don't say gay or trans bills, which would silence discussion of LGBTQ issues or talking about people in our schools and classrooms, and in some cases would mandate schools, teachers, and other employees to actually out an LGBTQ student to their parent without regard to whether or not that is something that the student wants or whether it would expose them to the possibility of family rejection or abuse. So we've seen about 300 bills to this effect introduced this year all across the country. Most of them have failed. That's the good news on this, is that we have successfully beat back a lot of this hostility, but we know that LGBTQ youth are very aware of all of these bills. They're aware of the debate, of the lies, the misinformation, and it is making life harder. And youth are telling us that it is affecting their mental health in negative ways, contributing to feelings of loneliness, isolation, sadness, and helplessness. And these are the things that we need to fight back against if we at all can.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the undercurrent of it also, Casey, is it's not just mandating you can't do these things, it's adding a criminal element to it. You know, that if you do these things, you can be held criminally negligent or be sued or arrested for participating or if you will, enabling, you know, the reassignment, for example, or whatever. I mean, you know, physicians are coming under attack under it as well. I mean, just look at, you know, we had worked so hard to decriminalize mental illness, and now what, you know, look at the it's starting to bubble up again in terms of the discussion after the shooting in Texas, about the issue isn't guns, it's mental illness. I mean, really? I mean, that's what this is about. So there's that kind of undercurrent push, and we all have to speak up to it. We have to speak out about it and say, no, that's not what it is. Granted, we could do better things. We need more funding to do better things in terms of mental illness and making services available. But don't lose sight of the fact that there's a whole agenda being kind of being pushed up through the bottom here, that we need to have it back the way it used to be, whatever that means. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I have an idea what people think it means, but it's so harmful. And you're right, Casey, the message is being sent to those kids that what you're doing is wrong. Even if you have these feelings, you need to bury them deeper, and you need to pretend they're not there. We have a responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. We have a responsibility to speak out and speak up and let people know this is wrong. It won't be tolerated. I don't care what other people say. This is just wrong.
Here. I certainly second that comment, Paul. And I think the message that kids get, well, everyone gets, but our kids are especially vulnerable, of course, is not only that what you're doing is wrong, but that you are wrong. Somehow you are not okay, acceptable as a human. Kema or Sin, did you want to, we started off talking a little bit about specific challenges for trans and gender diverse youth. Anything you wanted to add?
100%. I am who they are targeting. I am who they are violencing. And I wish we could stay having a conversation on trans joy, because there's so much of it. There's so much good in our community. There's so much mutual aid and mutual care. But if you think of why this is, it's because no one else is truly fighting for us as hard as we are fighting for each other. And that's really hard, because we're in a room right now with 500 people, basically. All of us are trying to do something about it. But the loudest voices are the ones that are trying to actively kill us. This is an act of genocide. This is an act of very targeted violence against a community that has historically had to fight. This is an act of genocide. And I know that for me, if I didn't go to the school that I went to, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have transitioned. I wouldn't have the support. That's it. I wouldn't be here. And for everyone to be hyper-focused on our bodies, regulating our rights, our autonomy, our parental support, that even when we are getting that support, our families feel helpless too. And what I think needs to be also addressed in this is the access of sexism and ableism and racism that comes into the ideologies that perpetuate these bills, that make these people feel like they can control our lives, control our bodies. And this isn't a specific thing. We're seeing it with abortion rights. We're seeing it with so many other axes of oppression that we're supposed to be investing in these taxpayers' dollars so that way they fight for us. They're there to fight for us, but then how can it make sense that the same governor comes from the same place as Paul? How does it make sense that these two people are actively working against each other? It doesn't make sense. And given the current climate, I think that there's a handful of things that everyone should be mobilized to do, because it's tiring to have to fight all the time. So use your vote. If you have the power to vote, that's extremely, extremely powerful. What about our undocumented trans folks? Who's protecting them? It's all of our obligations to protect them. Speak to your representatives, uplift our stories. And once again, like, bring us into those spaces. I don't want to have to be the only one fighting here. And, you know, equip us with the language and tools to be able to come into those spaces. so that way we can be the healthcare providers, that way we can be the representatives, that way we can be the people that are saying all these things, and we aren't preaching to avoid, but rather the ones being able to do something about it and advocate for our trans athletes. I was a high school athlete, and to see that I just missed all of this violence by a slim margin is wild to me. That, you know, we aren't here to steal games or steal awards. We just want to play like everyone else. We just want to exist like everyone else. We just want to experience joy and safety like so many. So I think that although there is so much joy and so much good that comes with pride, everyone has the obligation to put their fight into the ballots, to put their fights into mutual aid, to give back to the spaces that, you know, my Black trans ancestors fought so hard for, that I just want to reiterate that it's within all of our power to do something about it. And it's no longer, we can't live in an era of pinning blame or pinning obligation to someone else. All of us are responsible for this. So within all of that joy, take all that energy, and my commitment, and I hope all of y'all's is too, is to continue to do something about it.
Sin, that was beautiful, beautifully spoken, beautifully said, and thank you for your passion. And I saw many chats roll by as you were speaking of people saying, we will fight with you. And I love to see that. That warms my heart. And it's also in keeping, I have to say, with the great tradition of Mental Health America, where our founder had a famous quote that we often use, which is, we will fight in the open. He, at the time, he was fighting for deinstitutionalization of people with mental illness. And now a new fight is on our hands. And you've just given us the rallying cry, I think, Sin, and we will fight in the open with and for you and each other. And I love the way that this panel laid out the issues of the day and gave us so much to think about and so much to take forward into Pride Month. And I love that this was a balanced conversation about the obstacles that are still before us and the hope that is possible, and the access to resources like those of you right here on this screen and all that you represent, and the armies of advocates and allies that we know are out there to be mobilized for this. And so I'll offer one closing word, and then if you all have one closing word, then we'll be wrapped up at the hour. But I would just reflect, as somebody who is now 55 years old and who came out when I was a teenager, and who had an out gay father whose life was a Methodist minister, but after he came out, he had to leave his profession, and he really, it was in some ways was rather exiled. And after he came out, it was a difficult, very difficult for him. But he was a generation older than I am, and when I look at his life and my life, and when I think about the fact that my lifetime spans everything from the Stonewall riots when I was 3 years old to gay marriage, to legalized gay marriage when I was in my 40s. That is kind of lightning speed progress. I do think that some of what we're facing today is a bit of backlash, frankly, to progress. It's my own opinion. And that progress goes like this, and history goes a little bit, sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we have our work cut out for us, as you all have pointed out. And this was just an excellent conversation. I thank you so much. I feel hopeful and prideful in all of your presence. And I'm so grateful to all of our attendees who joined us today. I thank you. We value your time. We value your allyship with us. Any final words as we say goodbye from the panel?
I first want to say thank you again for allowing me to be here as an African American woman, bisexual. This is definitely a great way to start the rest of my day. being our authentic self, loving who we are, just listening to everyone here, seeing the comments come in. Yes, we have a fight, but this is in our DNA. This is what we do, right? And we will continue to be resilient. We will continue to be empowered, and we will continue to be prideful in who we are. So thank you again for all the stories I've heard today, the comments, just being allowed to be in this space, just being me, just allowing me to be me, just in this space is just great. And I will take that with me. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll call that the last word because that was beautifully spoken and we're right at 2:00. Thank you, Kema. Thank you, Sin. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Paul. What a joy to spend this hour with you. Happy Pride Month, everyone. And thank you to all of our advocates and allies. Happy Pride.